Tube amps versus digital, faux pas on stage. We've got it all coming up right here on this next episode of Ask RGD. Thank you very, very much for checking out this episode of Ask RGD. If you have never seen an episode of Ask RGD on this channel, RGD, of course, standing for Robert's Guitar Dungeon, which is the name of the channel that you are watching. The rules here are very, very simple. You ask me a guitar or guitar-related question, and I answer said question in the form of a video. So, today we have a twofer. I'm going to answer two questions in this episode. This first one comes from Mo's Right Charlie. He says, any thoughts on tube amps versus digital? I like the tone on my Fender Deluxe Reverb, but the effects on my Roland Cube 30. Small amp versus huge power amp. Since most gigs are mic'd, is there really a need for the big Marshall type amp? More speakers versus more amperage to increase power. It is often said to add more speakers because it takes 10 times the amp power to equal doubling the speakers. Any thoughts? Okay, that was actually about 4 questions. Let's see. Let's start with tube amps versus digital. I don't know that I would consider myself to be a tube amp snob, but there was a point in time when I would have taken tubes over just about any solid state amp on the market. There's a few exceptions out there. I've always been real fond of the Roland JC120. I've talked about that amp many, many times on this channel. There's a few others out there, but for the most part, I still am a tube guy. That said, the digital stuff has come a long way, particularly in about the last 10 years. The technology, digital amplifier technology has really, really advanced. And that is very evident by devices out there such as the Line 6 Helix, the Axe FX, the Fractal Axe FX, which is now in the 3rd generation. And even the first 2 generations are still pretty sought after on the used market. Let's see, the Kemper Profiler is probably the biggest one that everybody seems to be going after these days. And you also have other units out there such as the Boss GT1000 and the Head Rush. Actually, I think it's just called the Head Rush. The brand prior to that actually was known as Akai, but they seem to have dropped the Akai because they are an InMusic brand. And as a side note, I find InMusic to be one of the shadiest MI companies out there as far as their marketing goes, because they produce products such as the Headrush FR cab, the Alto TS312 PA speaker, and now they have just come out with the Alesis Strike drum amp, and all 3 of those things, even though they're all marketed completely different under 3 completely different brands they happen to own, every single one of them are the exact same thing. They'll never come out and admit that they're the exact same thing, but you'll never get a straight answer out of them either that there's anything different between them. So take that for what it's worth. That said, as I mentioned, the technology has come a long way. There's a lot of players that are dumping their really big and heavy, high-powered tube amps, all in favor of a Helix or an Axe FX. One of those things I just mentioned, and for live guitar players, a lot of them are taking those things and implementing an IR of some kind, and then going straight into the mixing board. That's becoming really, really popular among the praise and worship crowd, where those stages and churches are trying to eliminate amps on stage altogether. So silence on stage is becoming a pretty big thing among that crowd. So to answer that part of your question, tube versus digital, I think the quality of the two are a lot closer together than they used to be. I have not gone the digital route because my experience with programming any kind of processors or anything even remotely close to those things I just described, I can't stand it, and I find it frustrating, and I find it really, really easy to get a great sound out of these things as I'm sitting here by myself. But in a band situation, I completely disappear, and it's a total nightmare to try to dial it back in to where it sounds right with the band, and they're just not for me. Plus I enjoy, as far as effects go, I enjoy messing with a whole bunch of stomp boxes in front of me and switching those out and doing some different things with those. That's just me. So while I am not going to be making the jump to digital anytime soon, I certainly see why there's so many people out there nowadays that are. And no, I think there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. For the second part of your question, small amp versus huge power amp, since most gigs are mic'd, is there really a need for the big Marshall type amp anymore? I say yes. And the reason why, this Randall right here, this handy dandy Randall RD20 is a 20 watt head, and you know, it gets pretty loud. You know, I played a gig with it one time a couple of years ago. Matter of fact, it was this head and this handy dandy Seismic Audio 212 cabinet that I always run it through. Whenever I'm using that amp in here and I'm using it for a demo, it's that cabinet that you're hearing it through. Mic'd up, of course. And I played a gig with it a couple of years ago, and it was it was a club gig in front of about 200 people or so, and I had it over off to it wasn't even behind me. I like to set my amp off to the side, or if there's a big PA speaker or something like that kind of sort of in front of me, I'll set it up there and then point it back at me. And I find that not only helps me, it's not only better for me because I can also use my amp as a monitor. But it also helps to control the stage noise and throw my sound across the stage so everybody else can hear me and I can hear everybody else a lot better. So that's why I always set my amp up not behind me but to the side or somewhere else pointing at me. So, but that said, I had it. The problem with a lot of low wattage amps, for smaller gigs, absolutely, but this particular gig, with this amp, you turn it up to about 5, and then beyond that, it doesn't necessarily get much louder. If you turn it up past that, it just kind of starts to break up more. So with this, with that amp, I could have used a little bit more headroom and a little bit more volume out of it. 40 watts probably would have been a lot more conducive to that gig. 50 certainly would have been plenty, So there is that to take into consideration. And by the way, we were all mic'd up at that gig and coming out of the front of the house. I certainly didn't have any complaints that night about that. However, I did have a tough time hearing myself on stage. And I'm an old school guy. I don't use any monitors or anything like that. I prefer to know where I'm supposed to be in the song and use my amp as my stage monitor, and that's just the way I've always done it. And the second part of that question, you said more speakers versus more amperage to increase power. It is often said to add more speakers because it takes 10 times the amp power to equal doubling the speakers. Any thoughts? I've actually never heard that before in my life. More speakers, and more speakers does not equal volume. More speakers does equal more air being moved and a bigger sound, but I don't necessarily think that it equals more volume. This Randall that I was just talking about on a 212, on an oversized 212 cabinet behind me, I know for a fact is not anywhere near as loud as this 60 watt PV 112 combo on this side of me. This thing gets way louder. And a lot of that, yes, is, and that's strictly because of, it's got an extra 40 watts in it. The only thing that I know that is going to equal more, that's going to equal more volume is more wattage. More speakers are certainly, I love more speakers. I think it certainly sounds better. To me, nothing will ever beat the sound of a good solid 412. But this head is not going to be louder through the 412 cabinet than it is through the 212 cabinet. It just doesn't work that way. This question comes from Skilled Rook. Says, "Hi Robert, I was wondering what was the worst mishap you've ever had playing guitar? Example, guitars falling off stage, dying batteries, etc." Lord knows I have, when I originally responded to your comment on the video, thank you for submitting your question, by the way, I said then that I've been fortunate enough I haven't really had too many faux pas, too many mishaps, if you will. The truth is I actually have quite a few of them when I'm in here creating content for my channel. Obviously, they get edited out or re-recorded and you guys never see them. And it's just me in here, so that's part of being a one-man crew running a YouTube channel. On stage, however, again, I've been fortunate I haven't had too much go wrong. However, there was one time I was watching a band with some friends in it. All 5 of those guys are good friends of mine. It was a local band who were no longer together called Recoil, and every time I went out and saw them play, it was inevitable. One of the 2 guitar players, was gonna haul me up on stage and make me play a song or 2 with them. And this one was towards the end of the gig, and they were a rock cover band. And sure enough, this particular night, Dean came down. Dean is an amazing guitar player, by the way, an amazing guitar player and an even better guy. Dean came down and handed me his guitar because he wanted me to come up and play. I don't remember what the song was, but while I was up there, let's go ahead and it was he invited me up for the second to last song of the night, and they figured while I was up there I should just go ahead and close it out with them. So the last song that they played was "Killing in the Name" by Rage Against the Machine. That's a song that I've played many times. I know frontwards and backwards. However, just before, probably about a minute or so before it was time for the solo, Dean was running this thing on a Line 6 G90 wireless system. And I remember that because I actually sold him that wireless system when I was at the store. And he handed me that guitar, and probably, I didn't have it in my hands probably 30 seconds or a minute or so before it was time for the solo, and the batteries died. So I'm sitting there with Dean's guitar slung over me, and Dean all of a sudden is playing guitar tech, and he's reaching down in his rack grabbing spare batteries, and he's swapping batteries out, while me and I'm trying to keep this thing on, and and fake playing while he's changing the batteries, and finally gets the batteries changed. And then it was time for the solo, and I looked over at his pedal board, and that, if you're not familiar with that song or that solo was recorded, and it really needs to be played with a Digitech whammy pedal. And he didn't have one. He always rewrote it himself and played slide with a beer bottle. And I had no idea how he played that solo. So he comes over behind me, grabs a guitar from, while it's still over my, shoulder, pulls it, here, I got it, and plays the solo, with me sitting there holding it. So I'm sitting here with Dean right here playing his guitar hanging over my shoulder, playing this solo. He finishes the solo, and I'm just sitting there with this look on my face. I had no idea what I should have been doing in the meantime. And he finished the solo, handed me back the guitar, and and I admit I'm not real comfortable. I'm not very confident when it comes to playing guitar solos on the fly. For those of you that have seen videos in my channel, where I've done demos and stuff, every solo that I've done is I hash out ahead of time, and it takes me anywhere from a half hour to 2 hours to get that done, and actually get it onto a recording. Sometimes there's plenty of times I probably should have taken more time than that. But anyway, he hands the guitar back to me. I finished the song, and it was kind of an awkward thing. And if I had it to do over again, there's a few things I would have done different. But nobody seemed to notice. Nobody seemed to care. It was a great night. It was a great crowd. It was a great show. I was at a venue up in Elwood, Indiana called Backstage Bar that was actually a really, really cool venue. It's got a great big stage on it, and it's actually just a bar. They don't serve food or anything. It's just a bar with a stage in it. That one comes to mind. Like I said, if I had that one to do over again, there'd be a few things that I'd done different. So, tell you what, down in the comments, why don't you share your favorite, your favorite guitar mishap or faux pas? And, I'm sure we can all get a few laughs in out of it. Let's face it, you might not be a real guitar player if something like this has never happened to you here at some point. I will post any pertinent links down in the description below, as I always do. There are various different methods for you, my wonderful viewers, to support this channel down in the description. It really does go a long way when you take the time to check those out. Thank you very, very much. Please consider hitting the subscribe button to this channel if you haven't already, and yeah, and let's embarrass ourselves down in the comments section. And by the way, there are various different ways that you can have your question featured in an episode of Ask RGD. You can, of course, leave it down in the comments section down below. You can send it to me in the form of an email. You can send it to me in the form of a Facebook message. There's also a group on Facebook called The Guitar Dungeon, and I see everything that goes on in that group there. You are So please feel free to drop your question down in there as well. If you send me the question privately, I will assume that you would prefer to remain anonymous, and I will treat it as such in the video. If you leave it on one of the public comment forums, I will assume that you don't care about your anonymity, and I will go ahead and mention the name that is attached to the question. So, I haven't done one of these in a while. I need some questions.